They arrived at dawn, not running, not crying, not holding each other, just walking. 16 young adults stepped through the arrival doors of Clark International Airport, their backpacks light, their eyes heavy. No one smiled, no one spoke. Airport staff whispered to each other. These weren't tourists. They weren't even relieved. They looked like people who had survived something and weren't sure they deserved to. Standing near the barrier was Dr. Marissa Velasco, a Filipino sociologist assigned to coordinate emergency university placements for displaced students. She'd worked with evacuees before, after typhoons, after Mindanao clashes, after Kabul. She knew grief. She knew shock. But this was different. These students didn't cling to one another. They avoided eye contact, as if standing too close might reopen something buried. And one boy at the back kept his fist clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Marissa lowered her welcome sign. Something terrible had followed them here. The students were brought to a converted retreat house near Los Baños, tucked between rolling hills and old mango trees that dropped fruit softly onto the grass each afternoon. The place had once been used for silence retreats, prayer, reflection, healing. It should have felt safe. But safety, Marissa quickly realized, only gave their memories more room to breathe. Meals were the first sign. They never sat together, not out of politeness, not out of shyness. They chose tables as far apart as possible, backs turned, eyes fixed on plates they barely touched. Spoons clinked softly against bowls, the only sound in a room meant for conversation. They walked the corridors the same way, never side by side, never in pairs, always spaced apart, like strangers forced onto the same sidewalk. Sometimes Marissa watched them from the far end of the hall, counting the steps between each student. 3 meters, 5 meters, sometimes more. As if closeness itself was dangerous. At night, something else unsettled her. Their doors stayed open, every single one. Not wide enough to invite company, just enough to see out. Light spilled into the hallway in thin, watchful strips. From the corner of her eye, Marissa could feel it. Movement behind door frames, shadows shifting when she passed. They weren't afraid of being alone. They were afraid of being unseen. They were watching each other, tracking who slept, who paced, who didn't. One evening, as cicadas buzzed loudly in the trees outside, Brother Thomas, the caretaker, approached her near the stairwell. He spoke softly, as if the walls themselves might overhear. "Ma'am," he said, lowering his voice, "they don't laugh." Marissa turned toward him. "They don't argue. They don't even complain about the food," he added, attempting a weak smile that didn't quite land. He hesitated, fingers tightening around the rosary in his pocket. "It's like they're waiting for something to happen." Waiting. That word followed Marissa back to her room. She opened their files again, spreading them across the desk as rain began tapping gently against the window. 16 names, 16 birth dates clustered within 3 years of each other. Same university, same department, same evacuation route, evacuated together, approved together, traveled together. On paper, they were a unit, a success story. But Marissa had worked long enough to know paper lies. What she saw instead were gaps, unwritten moments, questions no form ever asked. Why no inside jokes? Why no shared grief? Why no comfort in familiarity? These weren't students leaning on each other to survive. They were survivors standing on opposite sides of an invisible fault line, fractured. And Marissa knew something else too. Fractures don't stay quiet forever. They spread, they deepen, and eventually, they break. It happened on the 5th night, just after midnight, when the retreat house was supposed to be sleeping. A sudden crash tore through the silence, wood splintering against tile. Then a scream, raw, panicked, the kind of sound that doesn't ask for help. It announces disaster. Marissa was already moving before she realized she'd stood up. Her slippers slapped against the floor as she ran down the hallway, past those half-open doors, past faces frozen in door frames. Every door was open now, every student awake, drawn by the same sound. The common hall was in chaos. A chair lay overturned near the wall, a cup shattered near the doorway, tea spreading across the tiles like a dark stain. In the center of the room, a girl named Anya was collapsed on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest, her entire body shaking as if she were freezing in a tropical night. Tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound anymore, just sharp, uneven breaths that wouldn't slow. Across the room, a tall boy, Maxim, was being held back by two others. His shoulders were rigid, his jaw locked so tight Marissa thought his teeth might crack. Anya looked up at him then. Her eyes were wild. "You don't get to act innocent!" she screamed, her voice breaking as she tried to stand. "You watched it happen!" The room recoiled. Maxim went pale. Not angry, not defensive, just hollow. "I didn't choose this," he whispered. The words barely reached the walls. Silence fell so suddenly it felt physical. No one moved. No one spoke. Every student in that room knew exactly what Anya meant. They didn't need names. They didn't need explanations. The past had finally caught up. Everyone, that is. Except Marissa. She stood between them, steadying her breath, grounding herself before speaking. "What happened before you left Ukraine?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. The question hung in the air, heavy, dangerous. No one answered. Eyes dropped to the floor, hands clenched. One student turned away completely, pressing their forehead against the wall as if it might erase the moment. Seconds stretched. Then a voice, quiet, almost lost, came from the far corner of the room. Lev, the boy who rarely spoke, the one who always kept his distance, the one whose fist was always clenched. He didn't raise his head. "Someone didn't make it out," he said. Just that. No emotion, no accusation. But the words landed like a fracture snapping open. Anya let out a broken sob. Maxim closed his eyes. And suddenly, the truth, the one they had carried across borders and oceans, began to leak into the open. Slowly, painfully, inevitably. There were 17 of them at the beginning. 17 names on the class list. 17 backpacks stacked against the dorm wall. 17 voices arguing late into the night about exams, about plans, about a future that suddenly no longer existed. One more student. Her name was Irina. When the evacuation order finally came, it wasn't dramatic. No sirens, no speeches, just a message passed quietly from phone to phone. Be at the checkpoint by dawn. They reached the border as the sky was turning gray, the air sharp with cold and exhaust. Soldiers counted them once, then again. The transport officer shook his head. 16 seats, he said flatly. No more. Only 16. No exceptions. No second trip. The warning came next, spoken without cruelty, but without softness either. "Decide now," the soldier said, "or everyone stays." The group pulled away from the road, huddling together as engines idled behind them. Minutes passed, then hours. Fear sharpened every word. Voices rose, hands waved, someone cried. They talked in circles, about fairness, about chance, about who deserved it more, about parents waiting, about siblings already across the border. Irina stood slightly apart. She always did. Her breathing was already uneven. The cold made it worse. Irina had asthma. She carried an inhaler everywhere. She also moved slower. Not dramatically, not enough to complain about, just enough to notice when time mattered. Someone finally said it. Quietly, almost apologetically. "She'll slow us down." The words hung there, fragile and poisonous. No one agreed out loud, but no one challenged it either. Eyes shifted, feet shuffled. Irina looked up, searching faces she'd known for years. No one met her gaze. When the moment came, when the soldier stepped closer and raised his voice, no one stood beside her. No one said, "I'll stay." No one said, "We'll wait." Irina stayed where she was. The rest of them stepped forward. The convoy doors closed. Engines started. Irina was still standing there when the transport pulled away, growing smaller in the rear window, one hand raised, not waving, just lifted. 2 days later, the news came. A short message, a photograph sent by someone who hadn't made it out. Their dormitory building had been shelled. Irina was inside. There was no funeral, no goodbye, just a name that stopped being spoken. The group never talked about it again. Not on the road, not on the plane, not when they arrived somewhere safe, until now. Anya's body gave out before her voice did. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, her hands clawing at her chest as if she could pull the moment back out of herself. "We didn't push her," she cried through broken breaths. "We didn't force her to stay." She looked around the room, desperate. "We just stepped away." And sometimes that is worse than violence, because it looks like nothing, but it costs everything. Accusations came next, not all at once, not screaming at first. They arrived like cracks spreading through glass. "You told us to hurry," someone said, voice sharp with panic that had nowhere left to go. "You didn't wait," another fired back. "You could have stayed with her. You could have said something." Voices overlapped, fingers pointed. Years of friendship unraveled in minutes. But even as the blame ricocheted across the room, no one could outrun the truth pressing in from every side. They had all made the same choice, not because they were cruel, not because they were monsters, but because they were afraid. They chose to survive. Marissa stayed where she was. She didn't raise her voice, didn't call for order. She let the words burn themselves out, let the shouting echo until it turned thin and exhausted. Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that forces you to hear your own breathing. That was when a chair scraped softly against the floor. Everyone turned. Nanay Pilar had stepped forward from the doorway. She was small, her back slightly bent, her hands rough from years of cooking for people who came and went. The scent of garlic and oil still clung faintly to her apron. She wiped her hands on the cloth, as if preparing herself. "You think this is new?" she asked quietly. No one answered. "During the war here," she continued, her voice steady, "my family hid in the hills." The students froze. "Soldiers came," Nanay Pilar said. "They said someone in the village was helping the rebels." Her eyes did not leave theirs. "They said if we didn't point to a house, they would burn them all." She paused, long enough for the words to settle. "One house burned anyway." The room was completely still now. No breathing, no movement. "We lived," Nanay Pilar said, her voice lowering, "and for years after we hated ourselves for it." She looked at each of them, one by one, not accusing, not forgiving, remembering. "Living isn't the crime," she said softly. "Forgetting is." The words didn't excuse what they had done, but they made something else possible. And in that quiet, something finally shifted. That night, something shifted. Not loudly, not all at once. There was no sudden forgiveness, no dramatic embrace. The air simply changed. The students didn't apologize to each other, not yet. But they stopped pretending nothing had happened. The chairs moved closer, not together, but closer than before. Someone poured water for another without being asked. Another student handed Anya a tissue and didn't look away when she took it. They began to speak, not in long speeches, not in complete sentences, fragments, about Irina's laugh, about how she always forgot her charger, about the way she slowed down, not because she was weak, but because she refused to panic. They talked about fear, how it tightens the chest, how it narrows the world until there's only one way forward. They talked about the moment they turned away, not to accuse, to understand. Hours passed. At some point, Lev spoke again, quietly, as if testing the weight of his own voice. "What if we didn't let her disappear?" No one answered right away. Then someone nodded. The next morning, they cleared a small table near the window where sunlight fell softly in the afternoons. They placed a photograph there. Irina, smiling slightly, caught mid-laugh. A candle beside it. Nothing elaborate, nothing performative. Just enough to say, "We remember." But remembrance wasn't enough. Later that day, they gathered around a laptop, hands hovering uncertainly over the keyboard. They pooled their stipends, money meant for food, for transport, for starting over. Someone suggested reaching out to aid groups. Another looked up refugee education programs. They argued gently this time, listened. They started a fund, not for tuition, not for comfort, for students who didn't make it out, students whose names stopped appearing on lists. When it came time to fill in the first line, no one hesitated. Irina's name went at the top of the page, not as an apology, as a promise. Healing didn't come all at once. Some nights, guilt returned, but something else grew alongside it. Responsibility. Maxime volunteered at a trauma hotline. Anya began teaching math to refugee kids online. Lev, once silent, started speaking at forums about survivors' guilt. They didn't rewrite the past. They carried it forward. Months later, Irina's mother wrote back after receiving a letter. She didn't offer forgiveness. She offered truth. "I think my daughter would want you to live," the letter said. "So live honestly." Sometimes that's all you're given. When journalists later asked Marissa why the story resonated globally, she said this: "Because it wasn't about heroes. People want clean stories, good guys, bad guys, but war doesn't offer that. It offers impossible choices and asks ordinary people to survive them. These students didn't come to the Philippines to be saved. They came carrying a weight, and instead of telling them to drop it, we helped them learn how to carry it together." Somewhere in Ukraine, Irina's name is still spoken, and thousands of miles away, 16 people live every day trying to be worthy of it, because you can't change the moment you survive, but you can choose what you become afterward. And sometimes, that choice echoes far beyond you.